My daughter perished in a horrific accident. The morning after her funeral, a stranger found me on the church steps and handed me a key. Anne whispered, "She is waiting. Come." She never mentioned this place. I flew across the country because 4 words on a card told me to come. But as the door opened, I froze. Sitting there was the very person I had just laid to rest at the cemetery. A terrifying truth began to unfold, one that the traitor could never have anticipated. "I'm so grateful to have you here. To help me reach more people, could you share where you are watching from? Which city or country are you in? Also, please note this story blends narrative elements for education and entertainment. Any similarity to actual names or settings is coincidental, but the message shared is vital for you." The casket was white. I remember thinking that was wrong. Valerie hated white. She called it the color of surrender. Her apartment walls were burnt orange and deep teal. Her favorite coat was the color of red wine. She wore mismatched socks on purpose, laughing every time someone noticed. White was the last color my daughter would have chosen for herself. But there it was, buried under an avalanche of white lilies, sitting at the front of St. Michael's Episcopal Church, while 200 people in black filled the pews behind me. I sat in the first row, alone. My name is Edward Harrison, 67 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a federal financial inspector, tracking fraud, dismantling schemes, following money through shell companies and offshore accounts until the truth had nowhere left to hide. I was good at my job. Some people said I was the best. But sitting in that church on that Tuesday morning in January, staring at a casket that held what remained of my only daughter, I felt like the most useless man alive. The police said it was a car accident. Early morning black ice, a stretch of road outside the city. The vehicle struck a concrete barrier and caught fire so completely that by the time first responders arrived, there was nothing left to identify. No DNA. No fingerprints, no face to say goodbye to. They identified her through dental records. Case closed within 72 hours. I never saw those records. At the time, I didn't think to ask. Grief has a way of making even the sharpest mind go completely terrifyingly blank. I stared at the casket and tried to remember the last time I had heard her laugh. 4 months ago, a Sunday afternoon call, her voice bright and warm, telling me about a pigeon that had landed on her studio window and refused to leave for 3 hours. She said she named it Gerald, said Gerald had strong opinions about her painting technique. I laughed with her. I told her I'd call the following Sunday. I didn't know that would be one of our last easy conversations. My attention shifted to the man at the podium. Julian Mercer, my son-in-law, 44 years old, CEO of EtherX Technologies, the kind of face that photographers loved and juries believed. 6 years ago at the wedding, I had shaken his hand and told him to take care of my daughter. He had looked me in the eye and said, "She'll always be safe with me, Edward." I watched his hands now. In 31 years of federal work, I learned that grief does specific things to the human body. It makes the hands restless. It puts a particular weight behind the eyes that no one can rehearse. I had interviewed hundreds of people in the worst moments of their lives. I knew exactly what real devastation looked like. What I was watching did not look real. Julian's hands were perfectly still. Not the stillness of a man holding himself together, the stillness of a man who had rehearsed stillness. His pauses landed at exactly the right moments. His voice broke on exactly the right words. When he stepped back from the podium and accepted water from Elias Drummond, my family lawyer, he drank it in 2 measured sips without a tremor. Elias caught my eye across the room, a look I couldn't immediately interpret, something between caution and communication. Then Julian leaned close and said something in his ear, and Elias looked away. I filed that away. After the service, Julian placed both hands on my shoulders and looked at me with an expression of such practiced, perfect sorrow that something cold moved through my chest. "She would have wanted you to be strong, Edward," he said. 5 words, 11 syllables. And in 31 years of sitting across from people who were lying to me, I had learned to listen not just to what people said, but to what they chose to say instead of something else. He didn't say I miss her. He didn't say I can't believe she's gone. He said she would have wanted to. Past tense, already settled, already filed away. "Thank you, Julian," I said. He squeezed my shoulders and moved on. I stood in the emptying church surrounded by white lilies Valerie would have despised, and felt something shift in the back of my mind. Not grief, not anger. Something quieter and far more dangerous than either. A question. What exactly was in that casket? I buttoned my coat and walked out into the January cold. I didn't have an answer yet, but I would find one. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair by the window with a glass of bourbon I never touched, watching the city lights blur and sharpen through the glass as the hours crawled past. The January wind rattled the frame every few minutes. I let it. I had no energy for anything, except turning that one question over and over in my mind, like a stone I couldn't put down. What exactly was in that casket? By 3 a.m, I had convinced myself I was being irrational. I was a grieving father. Grief distorts things, bends a carefully trained mind into shapes it was never meant to hold. By 4 a.m, I had unconvinced myself again. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded note the young woman had pressed into my hand at the church. I had forgotten it completely. I unfolded it carefully, the paper soft from hours of warmth. A pencil drawing no bigger than my palm. A cicada wing spread body rendered in extraordinary detail. Underneath in handwriting, I recognized immediately 4 words. The shell is empty. My hands started trembling. I knew Valerie's handwriting the way I knew my own heartbeat. The same looping capitals she'd had since age 9, the same slight leftward slant no penmanship workbook had ever corrected. This was hers, without question. I pressed the note flat against my thigh and read it again. The shell is empty. A cicada sheds its shell and flies away. I pressed the note flat against my thigh and read it again, and I did not let myself interpret it, not yet. Not until I knew. My throat tightened until swallowing became something I had to consciously execute. I pressed my fist against my mouth and forced myself to breathe. In through the nose, hold for 4 counts out through the mouth. It didn't help, not even close. Because if that note was from Valerie, if she had written it and arranged for it to reach my hand at her own funeral, then my daughter was alive. And if my daughter was alive, then everything I had accepted in the past 72 hours was a lie constructed by the man who had stood at her podium with perfectly still hands. I was out of the armchair before I made a conscious decision to move. The next morning was gray and bitter. I walked to St. Michael's before 8 stood on the front steps in my heaviest coat and watched the street without entirely knowing what I expected to find. That was when I noticed the man across the street. 6'2" arms folded against a black town car, gray wool cap pulled low. He was looking directly at me, and when our eyes met, he didn't look away. He crossed the street in long, unhurried strides and stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Harrison," he said. That's right," I said. "And you are someone your daughter trusts," he said. My heart slammed against my ribs. "My daughter is dead," I said carefully. Inside the envelope was a key, a single key on a plain steel ring, the kind cut for a high-security residential lock, with no label and no identifying marks. Beneath it, folded once, was a small card in Valerie's handwriting. The Pinnacle Apartment, 99 Seattle, Washington. Below the address, 4 words in her hand. "She is waiting. Come." My hand shot to the iron railing. My knees stopped cooperating entirely. I gripped the cold metal and squeezed until the feeling came back. "Mr. Oakes." My voice came out scraped raw, barely controlled. "My daughter's funeral was yesterday. I sat in that church. I watched them. And now you're standing on these steps telling me she retained you 18 months ago for a time-sensitive matter." I stopped, pressed my mouth shut, breathed. "What exactly are you not telling me?" Graham Oakes looked at me with a careful, composed expression of a man who has delivered difficult information before and understands that the kindest thing he can do is be precise. "My instructions were to give you the key and the address," he said. "Nothing more. Your daughter was very specific about that. She said, and I am quoting her directly, 'He'll understand when he gets there. He just needs to get there.'" He closed his briefcase with a quiet click. "I've done what she asked, Mr. Harrison. The rest is yours. Mr. Oakes." I grabbed his arm before he could turn away. My grip was not entirely steady. "Is she safe? Can you tell me that much?" He looked down at my hand on his sleeve. Then he looked up at me, and for the first time something moved behind those careful professional eyes. Not quite emotion, but the shape it leaves when a person has spent considerable effort holding it at a precise distance. "She was alive and safe when she gave me my instructions," he said quietly. "That is what I know. That is what I am authorized to tell you." He placed his hand briefly over mine on his sleeve, a small human gesture there, and gone in a second, and then he stepped back. "Take the first available flight," he said. "She said you wouldn't need more reason than that." My eyes burned so fiercely I had to tilt my head back and press my fingers hard against the bridge of my nose. When I looked back down, I said the only thing that mattered. "What time is the first flight to Seattle, see?" "I'm 6 a.m. tomorrow," he said. "I've already booked your seat." You were very sure I'd say yes. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the structural suggestion of one. "She was very sure," he said. Then he walked back to the town car and disappeared into traffic without another word. I stood on those steps with a key in a hand that would not stop shaking while the city moved around me with its usual magnificent indifference. "She is waiting. Come." I closed my fingers around the key until its teeth pressed into my palm, small, sharp reel, and I let that reality travel up through my hand and into whatever part of me most needed to believe it. Then I put the key in my breast pocket close to my chest and went home to pack. The flight to Seattle departed at 6:04 in the morning. I was at the gate by 4:30 carrying a single bag I had packed in 40 minutes the night before, 3 days of clothes, my shaving kit, the note with the cicada drawing folded inside a book I wouldn't read, and the black Titan card tucked into my breast pocket where I could press my hand against it every few minutes to confirm it was still there. I bought a coffee I didn't taste and sat in the hard plastic chair nearest the window, watching the ground crews move through the darkness below, like ghosts in orange vests, and I tried to prepare myself for whatever was waiting for me on the other side of this flight. I couldn't. There is no way to prepare for something you cannot yet imagine. The plane was a 5.5-hour flight. I had a window seat. The man in the middle seat fell asleep before we reached cruising altitude, his head tipped back, mouth slightly open, utterly at peace with the universe in a way that made me want to shake him awake out of pure envy. The woman on the aisle read a paperback thriller, the entire flight turning pages, with the calm satisfaction of someone whose drama was safely contained between two covers. I stared out the window at the black sky turning slowly gray, and I let myself go back. The phone call came at 6:17 in the morning, 11 days ago. I remembered the exact time because I had just made coffee and was watching the minute hand on the kitchen clock, the way I always did in those first foggy moments before the caffeine reached my brain. The screen lit up Manhattan Police Department. I picked up immediately the way you do when a call comes from that number, at that hour, because your body already knows before your mind has caught up. "Mr. Harrison." A woman's voice, professional, careful, the voice of someone trained to deliver bad news without breaking. "Yes," I said. "This is Detective Anna Ruiz, Manhattan PD. Sir, I'm calling regarding your daughter, Valerie Harrison Mercer." The coffee mug was in my hand. I set it down on the counter before I dropped it. "There was an accident early this morning on County Road 14 outside the city limits. A vehicle registered to your daughter left the roadway and made contact with a concrete barrier. There was a fire." A pause. Exactly the right length. "Sir, I'm very sorry. Your daughter did not survive." I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen counter and leaned my weight into it. The linoleum was cold under my bare feet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a garbage truck was making its rounds. "How certain are you?" I heard myself ask. A brief hesitation. "The fire was extensive, Mr. Harrison. DNA analysis was not possible given the condition of the remains. However, dental records provided a positive identification. We are certain." "Whose dental records?" I asked. "Who provided them?" Another pause, slightly longer. "They were submitted by her husband, Mr. Julian Mercer, in coordination with the family dentist. Standard procedure in cases like this. Sir, is there someone who can be with you right now?" I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for 11 minutes, I know, because I watched the clock, because my mind needed something concrete to hold on to. And then I called Julian. He answered on the second ring, with a voice so smoothly broken it sounded like something out of a film. "Edward," he said softly, "I was just about to call you." "What happened?" I demanded. "She went out early. She sometimes drove when she couldn't sleep, you know how she was." A controlled exhale. "The road was icy. It happened fast. The investigator said she wouldn't have suffered." He delivered that last sentence the way a professional delivers a line. Smooth, practiced, landing on exactly the right note. And I, Edward Harrison, 31-year federal financial investigator, a man who had built his career on detecting deception, I believed him. Because grief had already moved into my chest like a tenant who owned the place, and it left no room for anything else. I hated myself for that now. Somewhere over Montana, the gray sky outside the window turned the pale gold of early sunrise, and I pulled the cicada drawing from the book in my bag and spread it flat on the tray table. The shell is empty. Julian had submitted the dental records. Julian, not the police, not a medical examiner, not an independent party. Julian had provided the single piece of evidence that identified the body. I pressed 2 fingers against my mouth and forced myself to think through it step by step, the way I used to approach a case file. Set the emotion aside. Follow the logic. A body burned beyond DNA identification. Julian had submitted the dental records, the only piece of evidence that closed the case, and no one had asked who provided them or why the timeline moved so fast. No second opinion sought. And a daughter who, if that note was genuine, had known exactly which young woman to pass it to at exactly the right moment to put it in her father's hand. This was not an accident. This was a construction. Elaborate, precise, and built by someone who understood how investigations worked well enough to close one before it properly began. The question was which someone. Julian had the motive. He had always struck me as a man who calculated his relationships the way other men calculated their portfolios. But Valerie was an architect and artist, a woman who designed spaces and filled them with intention. If anyone could construct something this intricate, it was her. She is waiting. My chest ached in 2 directions at once, the grief that had lived there for 11 days pulling one way, and something new pulling the other, something that felt dangerously, painfully close to hope. And hope, I had learned long ago, is far more terrifying than despair. Despair asks nothing of you. Hope demands everything. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and unhurried. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport shortly. Local time is 11:42 a.m. Current temperature a chilly 38 degrees. On behalf of your crew, welcome to Seattle. I folded the cicada drawing and put it back in my pocket. I looked out the window as the clouds broke, and Seattle appeared below, gray water, dark green hills. The city spread out like a circuit board along the edge of Puget Sound. Somewhere down there was a building called the Pinnacle. Somewhere in that building was apartment 99. And somewhere in that apartment was either the answer to the most important question of my life or the cruelest possible confirmation that grief had finally broken me completely. My hands were shaking again as the plane began to descend. I pressed them flat against my thighs and held them there. Whatever is waiting for you down there, I told myself, you are Edward Harrison. You have spent 31 years finding the truth. You can survive finding it one more time. I wasn't entirely sure I believed that. But the ground was coming up fast, and I was out of time to decide. The Pinnacle had no sign. That was the first thing I noticed when the taxi pulled up to the curb on 5th Avenue South, and I stepped out into the Seattle cold. Every other building on that block announced itself glass towers, with corporate logos bolted to their facades, hotel entrances, with brass lettering, a medical center with its name spelled out in blue, LED, across the entire top floor. But this building simply existed. 70 stories of dark glass and black steel, rising straight up from the sidewalk, like something that had grown there rather than been built, its surface so deeply tinted that the gray Seattle sky reflected back at me like a mirror. No name, no number, no indication whatsoever that anyone was meant to find it. I checked the address on the black card for the 3rd time. The Pinnacle Apartment, 99 Seattle, Washington. This was the address. I paid the driver, picked up my bag, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking up at the building. 70 floors. The top of it disappeared slightly into the low cloud cover, and I had the unsettling impression that it didn't entirely end, that it simply kept going into something I wasn't equipped to see. Get moving, Edward, I told myself. You didn't fly 5.5 hours to stand on a sidewalk. The lobby doors were black glass, set flush into the building's face, almost invisible, until you were close enough to see your own reflection in them. I pushed through and stepped inside. The lobby was enormous and almost entirely empty. Gray marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Ceilings that climbed 3 stories before meeting a grid of recessed lighting so subtle it seemed like the light was simply emanating from the air itself. A single security desk at the far end occupied by a large man in a dark suit who watched me cross the marble toward him with the expression of someone who had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. There were no other visitors, no one waiting for elevators, no coffee kiosk, no seating area, no decorative plants. This was not a building that wanted casual visitors. "Help you?" the security guard said. I placed the key on the desk in front of him without a word. He looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. At the specific cut of it, I realized not at me. Elevator bank C, he said. Use the key on the panel inside, 99th floor. And thank you, I said. Sir, he added just as I turned away. I looked back. Welcome to the pinnacle. There was something in the way he said it, not like a pleasantry, but like a statement of fact. Like he was telling me something that had weight. I walked to elevator bank C. There were 3 elevators in bank C, but only one that the black card would open, the one on the far right set. Slightly apart from the others, its doors the same deep black as the card itself. I inserted the key into a small panel beside the door. A soft chime. The doors parted. The elevator interior was dark wood and brushed steel. No buttons except for a single panel that read 99 and nothing else. The floor below my feet hummed with quiet, powerful machinery as the car began to rise, and I watched the floor indicator climb with a speed that pressed me gently but firmly into the back wall. 40 floors, 50, 60. My heart was beating in my ears. My mouth was dry in a way that the coffee at the airport had done nothing to help. I pressed my hand against my breast pocket and felt the solid weight of the key through the fabric of my coat. And I thought about the cicada drawing and the 4 words written in Valerie's handwriting, and the man outside the church with his low, careful voice and his almost smile. She's alive, and she needs her father. 70 floors, 80, 90. The elevator slowed, stopped, the doors opened. The first thing I saw was Vance. He was standing directly in front of the elevator, arms at his sides, feet shoulder-width apart, in the posture of a man who placed himself between doors and whatever lay beyond them as a matter of professional habit. Tall, even taller than he had seemed on the church steps. 6'2" at minimum, built through the shoulders in a way that suggested not vanity, but function, the kind of physical conditioning that existed for a specific purpose. Gray eyes that assessed me in the time it took me to take my first breath of the penthouse air. He was wearing a dark sweater and dark trousers, no jacket. On his left wrist, a plain black watch. On his right hip, I noticed the subtle but unmistakable line of a holster beneath the sweater's fabric. "Mr. Harrison," he said, same voice as the church steps, exactly the same. "You," I said, and my voice came out with more force than I intended, a whole flight's worth of held tension releasing at once. "You could have told me more. Yesterday on those steps, you could have given me something more than 4 words and an address. Do you have any idea what the last 18 hours were like for me? I sat on that plane for 5.5 hours, not knowing if I was flying toward my living daughter or toward the worst joke the universe had ever played on a man my age. Mr. Harrison." "Don't Mr. Harrison me," I said sharply. "I want to know—" And then I stopped, because from behind Vance's left hip at approximately the height of his mid-thigh, a small face had appeared. She was tiny, 3 years old, round-cheeked, with a head of dark curling hair that she had apparently made no peace with. It went in 4 directions at once and seemed perfectly happy about it. Her eyes were a striking gray, the particular shade of gray that the Seattle sky had been, when the plane broke through the clouds, light and deep at the same time. She was wearing red pajamas with small white stars on them, and she was holding a stuffed bear white, well-loved one ear, slightly more compressed than the other, from years of being carried by that particular ear pressed against her chest with both arms. She looked at me with the frank, total curiosity that only very small children and certain federal investigators ever fully achieve. Then she tilted her head to one side, the dark curls shifting with the movement, and she said in a voice as clear and certain as a bell, "Are you Grandpa?" My throat closed completely. 31 years of federal investigations, hundreds of interrogations, moments of real danger, real loss, real revelation. I had held myself together through all of it, with the particular iron composure that the job required, because the job required it, and I was good at the job. I was not good at this. My eyes burned so fiercely I had to press my lips together and look at the ceiling for a full 3 seconds. My chest felt like something inside it had cracked open along a seam I hadn't known was there. I crouched down slowly until I was at eye level with this small, gray-eyed girl in her star pajamas, and I looked at her face, really looked at it, and I saw Valerie. In the set of the eyes in the particular way, her chin pointed in the shape of her mouth. Valerie at 3 years old, who I had photographs of somewhere in a box in my apartment closet. "Yes," I managed, and my voice came out barely above a whisper, rough and unsteady in a way I couldn't control. "I think I am." The little girl studied me for one more serious moment. Then she held out the white bear toward me, with both hands as solemn as a diplomat presenting credentials. "This is Mr. Buttons," she announced. "He was scared on the elevator, but he's okay now." A sound came out of me that was half laugh and half something else entirely. Something that bypassed every defense I had ever built and went straight to whatever was behind them. I reached out carefully and shook Mr. Buttons' compressed ear. "Tell Mr. Buttons he was very brave," I said. She pulled the bear back and whispered something into its remaining upright ear with great seriousness. Then she looked back at me. "He says thank you," she reported. Vance cleared his throat quietly above us. I stood back up, blinking hard, and found him watching me with those gray eyes that gave away almost nothing. Almost. "She said you'd come," he said, and then he stepped aside, opening the path behind him. "Follow me, Mr. Harrison. There's someone who needs to see you." I picked up my bag. My hands were not steady. I didn't care. I followed him. Vance led me past the main living area of the penthouse without stopping. I caught glimpses as we moved floor-to-ceiling windows, showing a panoramic sweep of Puget Sound, the water slate gray and restless under the cloud cover. Furniture that was expensive, but lived in a child's drawing, taped crookedly to the refrigerator. In the open kitchen, a pair of tiny red shoes sitting by the couch. Someone had made this place a home, a real one. We reached a door at the far end of a short hallway. Vance stopped and put his hand on the knob, then turned to look at me. "She's been awake since 5 this morning," he said quietly. "Waiting for you. The treatment is working, but she's not at full strength. Whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you want to say." He paused and something moved briefly across his face, the shadow of genuine feeling breaking through the professional surface. "She needs calm first." Okay, I said. My voice sounded remarkably steady for a man whose heart was attempting to exit his body through his sternum. Vance opened the door. The room was dim lit by a single lamp on a bedside table, and the pale gray light coming through a window, whose curtains were half drawn. Medical equipment lined the wall to my left, an IV stand, a monitor tracking vitals in soft green lines, a small refrigerated unit I recognized as the kind used for specialized medications. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and something floral, a diffuser on the windowsill, putting out thin threads of lavender into the air. And on the bed, propped against a stack of pillows, wrapped in a dark blue blanket pulled up to her waist, was my daughter. Valerie. She was thinner. That was the first thing that hit me. Not the medical equipment, not the IV line running into her left arm, not the fact that her hair, which had always been thick and dark and full of its own opinions, had thinned dramatically, lying flat against her head in a way that made her look both younger and older at the same time. The thinness. She had lost weight. She didn't have to lose, and it had sharpened her face into something more angular, more exposed, like a sculpture that had been worked down to its essential structure. But her eyes were open, and they were Valerie's eyes, dark brown, intelligent burning, with the particular fierce intensity that had been her signature since she was old enough to form opinions, which in her case had been approximately age 4. She looked at me from across the room. Dad," she whispered, and that was the end of whatever composure I had managed to hold together for the past 18 hours. My bag hit the floor. I crossed the room, in 4 steps pulled a chair to the edge of the bed, sat down and took both her hands in mine, careful of the IV line, desperately careful, and I bent forward over them and I wept. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying that grief sometimes allows when you are trying to maintain your dignity. The other kind. The kind that starts somewhere below your lungs and comes up through everything, shaking your shoulders, burning your throat, making sounds you would be embarrassed by if embarrassment had any power over you in that moment. Which it didn't. "I'm here." I managed between breaths that kept breaking apart before I could finish them. "Valerie, I'm here, I'm right here." "I know." Her hand squeezed mine. Her grip was weaker than I remembered. Valerie had always had a strong grip, an artist's grip, but it was there, real and warm and present. "I knew you'd come, Dad. I knew it the second Vance put that card in your hand." "You were at the funeral," I said, pulling back enough to look at her face. My eyes were burning, my vision blurred at the edges. "That note, the girl who gave me the note. Maya, one of my students from the studio." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. She didn't know what she was carrying. I just asked her to find the man with gray hair in the front row and put it in his hand. "Valerie." I pressed her hands harder, felt her fingers curl around mine. "What did he do to you? What did Julian do?" The smile disappeared. Her jaw tightened and something old and exhausted moved through her eyes, the look of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is only now setting it down. Berthallium sulfate, she said. In my morning tea. He started 4 months into the marriage. Small doses, consistent, designed to look like a progressive illness. Fatigue, hair loss, tremors, kidney strain. By the time I understood what was happening, I'd already lost 12 pounds and my hands shook when I tried to paint. My stomach turned over so violently I had to press my back teeth together. How did you find out? I asked, my voice dropping to something raw and unsteady. I ran my own blood work through a private lab in Portland, she said. I told the doctor I was checking for nutritional deficiencies. She exhaled slowly, and it was a sound full of weight. When the results came back, I sat in my car in the parking lot for an hour. Then I called Vance. And then I pressed. She met my eyes directly. And then I started planning, she said. Because I knew if I confronted Julian, I'd be dead within a week. So I decided to die first on my own terms, before he could. Outside the half-drawn curtain, Seattle's gray sky pressed against the glass. The monitor beside the bed traced its quiet green lines. And in the hallway, I could hear Lily's small voice telling Mr. Buttons something important about breakfast. I looked at my daughter alive, damaged fierce and entirely herself, and I felt something shift inside my chest. The grief that had lived there for 11 days didn't disappear, but something moved in alongside it, something harder and steadier. Tell me everything, I said. She took a breath, and she began. We talked for 3 hours. Vance brought coffee at some point, strong black and heavy ceramic mugs, and Lily wandered in once to show Valerie a drawing she had made of what she described as a purple horse with feelings, and once to inform Vance with great urgency that Mr. Buttons needed a snack. Vance handled both situations with the same unruffled efficiency he apparently applied to everything, and each time Lily left the room, I watched Valerie's eyes follow her daughter to the door, with an expression so tender and so fierce at the same time that it made my throat tighten all over again. Then the door would close, and Valerie would turn back to me, and her face would become something else, focused, deliberate, the face of a woman who had spent months constructing something intricate and dangerous, and was now, for the first time, walking someone else through every room of it. The body, I said when she paused to take a careful sip of coffee. I need to understand the body first. Everything else can wait. She nodded. She had been expecting this question. Her name was Jane Doe 14, Valerie said. That's what the Florida County records listed her as. An unidentified woman approximately 30 to 40 years old, recovered from a highway accident outside Ocala. No next of kin, no identification, no dental records on file anywhere in the system. She had been in the county medical examiner's storage for 11 months. My jaw tightened. How did you access her? Through a private intermediary. Valerie set the mug down carefully on the bedside table. I won't give you the name because you don't need it, and knowing it doesn't help either of us. What matters is the chain. The body was released to a private mortuary in Florida on paper as an unclaimed cremation. Instead, it was transported by refrigerated vehicle to a facility in Georgia where a forensic document specialist, someone Vance located through his old network, created a complete dental record matching my own, down to a childhood filling I had done at age 9. Your actual dentist, I said. Dr. Paulson retired 2 years ago, and his practice was bought by a new group, Valerie said. His original paper records were archived, not digitized. Vance arranged for the archived file to be quietly updated. When Julian submitted the dental records to the police, they matched what was on file. I sat back in the chair and pressed my hand over my mouth, staring at her. The accident itself, I said. County Road 14. 4:30 in the morning, she said. No traffic cameras on that stretch. I checked it 6 times over 2 months. The car was mine, registered in my name with my insurance. Vance drove it out there. The body was already in the passenger seat, secured and positioned. She paused and something crossed her face. Not guilt exactly, but a heaviness, the weight of a decision made in desperation and lived with every day since. Vance set the fire. He had arranged a second vehicle a 1/4 mile down a side trail off the county road. No cameras, no lights, no houses within 2 miles. He was gone before the fire was visible from the highway. Accelerant on the interior, enough to sustain a temperature above 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, DNA denatures completely. Bone fragments remain, but are unidentifiable without a reference sample. And Julian provided the reference dental records before anyone could request independent verification, I said. Within 4 hours of the accident report, Valerie confirmed. He was ready, Dad. He had been waiting for me to die for months. When the call came that there had been a fatal accident involving my vehicle, he didn't hesitate for a second. He walked straight to his safe, pulled out a folder he had already prepared, and submitted it to the detective on the case. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I didn't notice until I took a sip, and the temperature registered wrong, and even then I barely cared. He had a folder already prepared, I repeated. A folder with my dental x-rays, my insurance information, our marriage certificate, and a notarized letter from him, as next of kin, authorizing immediate cremation of any remains. Her voice was steady, but her hands resting on the blanket had curled slowly into fists. He had that folder in his safe before I staged the accident, Dad. He was planning to use it. I just used it first. The room felt very quiet for a moment. Outside, the gray Seattle light shifted as a break in the clouds let through a thin wash of pale winter sun, and it moved across the floor between us like something slow and deliberate. "Doc, the cicada," I said. "The drawing you sent me, that's what you call it." For the first time since I had walked into this room, Valerie smiled a real smile, not the ghost of one, reaching all the way up into those dark, exhausted eyes. "The cicada shell," she said. "A cicada doesn't fight the thing that's trying to trap it. It sheds its skin and leaves the shell behind, perfect convincing exactly what the predator expects to find. And while the predator is busy with the empty shell, the cicada is already gone." She looked at me steadily. "Julian got my shell. A burned car on a dark road and a folder full of paperwork. Everything he expected, everything he needed." "And you were already gone," I said. "I was already here," she said, "building what comes next." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and looked at my daughter. This woman who had been systematically poisoned by the man she married, who had engineered her own disappearance with the precision of a federal operation, who was sitting in a medical bed with an IV in her arm and thinning hair and a 3-year-old daughter in the next room, and I felt something I had not felt in 11 days. Something that felt dangerously powerfully like pride. "All right," I said, my voice rough but steady. "Tell me about Julian. Tell me everything he's done, and then tell me what comes next." Valerie uncurled her fists. She straightened against her pillows, and the look that came into her eyes then was not the look of a woman who was sick and hiding. It was the look of a woman who had been waiting a very long time to begin. "Where do you want to start?" she asked. "The $3 billion or Lily?" My stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Both," I said. "Start with Lily." Valerie reached for her coffee mug, realized it was empty, and set it back down, with a small sound of frustration that was so entirely her. So completely the Valerie who had been irritated by small inconveniences her entire life with the same intensity she applied to large ones that I almost laughed. Almost. "Like Lily first," she said, "because Lily is the reason everything else matters." She pulled the blanket higher over her lap, the way she used to pull her coat tighter when she was preparing to say something that required steadiness, and she looked at me directly. "Julian is not Lily's father," she said. "He has never been Lily's father. He doesn't know that. He has believed since the day she was born that she is his biological child, and I have never told him otherwise." I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Valerie." "I know," she said. "Let me finish." I closed my mouth. "Before I married Julian, I knew I wanted a child," she said carefully. "I also knew somewhere I wasn't ready to fully admit yet that Julian was not someone I wanted raising my child. Not really, not deep down." Her jaw tightened briefly. "But I was 34. I had been with him for 2 years, and I told myself I was being irrational, that he was ambitious and controlled, but not dangerous, that I was projecting." She stopped, swallowed. "I was not projecting," she said quietly. "How did you—" I started. "California Cryobank," she said. "Sacramento facility. Anonymous donor, screened genetic profile, no legal paternity rights under California law. I made the appointment under my maiden name, paid in cash, and told no one." She met my eyes without flinching. "I was already 3 months pregnant when I married Julian. He assumed the timing was natural. I let him assume. Julian was not the kind of man who questioned things that flattered his ego. A pregnant wife meant he was virile, successful building a dynasty. He never asked for a test. Men like Julian don't. They assume the world arranges itself around their importance. The enormity of what she was describing settled over me slowly, the way cold settles into a room when a window has been open for a long time, gradually completely until it was in everything. If Julian is not Lily's biological father, I said, working through it step by step, the way I always worked through things, then he has no legal parental rights. Correct, Valerie said. Under Washington state law, a man who is not the biological father and has not completed a formal adoption process holds no parental rights regardless of marital status, if paternity is legally challenged and DNA testing proves otherwise. And under your father's estate, I began. Harrison Family Trust, she said, and her voice sharpened with something that sounded like the particular satisfaction of a chess player who had been planning 10 moves ahead for a very long time. Dad's trust specifies that in the event of my death, all assets held in my name transfer to my direct biological descendants, not to a spouse, not to an in-law, to my biological descendants. I felt the shape of it click into place. Lily inherits, I said. Lily inherits everything, Valerie confirmed. And Julian, who has spent 6 years positioning himself as the logical inheritor of Harrison family assets through his marriage to me, gets nothing. Not $1, not one share. He doesn't know, I said. He thinks he's Lily's father, Valerie said. He thinks that even if I'm gone, he controls Lily's inheritance as her legal guardian. He thinks he wins either way. Her voice dropped to something quieter and harder. He is wrong on every single count. I stood up from the chair because I needed to move, needed to put some of the energy building in my chest somewhere, and I walked to the window and stood looking out at the gray water of Puget Sound stretching out below us. 70 floors up, the boats looked like punctuation marks on a sentence written in slate and silver. There's more, I said. It wasn't a question. There's more, she agreed. I turned back from the window. He started making plans for Lily, Valerie said, and now her voice changed in a way that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. It went flat and careful the way voices go when the speaker is controlling something very large by sheer force of will. About 8 months ago, Vance intercepted communications between Julian and someone we haven't fully identified. The communications referenced Lily as a liability. The word landed in the room like something thrown hard against a wall. A liability. I repeated, and my own voice came out with a cold fury I hadn't heard in it since the last time I had sat across an interrogation table from someone who had hurt a child. If Lily is gone, Valerie said, and I am declared dead, Julian inherits everything as the surviving spouse under the secondary trust clause because without a living biological descendant, the trust reverts to the spouse. He had clearly read every page of the Harrison family trust documents. She pressed her lips together so hard they went white. He is meticulous, Dad. I will give him that. Where is Lily right now? I asked, sharply straightening. In the next room with Vance, Valerie said. She has not been out of Vance's sight for 7 months. Not once. Not for a single hour. I exhaled. My hands were pressed flat against my thighs, and I made myself release them finger by finger. Tell me about Vance, I said. Who is he exactly? How did you find him? Why does Lily call him? Daddy Vance, Valerie said, and something crossed her face that was complicated and warm and sad, all at the same time. Because she has known him since she was 18 months old, and at that age a man who feeds you breakfast every morning and reads you stories every night earns a title, whether he asked for it or not. Through the closed door as if on cue came the sound of Lily's voice raised in delight about something, followed by Vance's low response, and then Lily laughing a full, bright, completely unself-conscious child's laugh that bounced off the walls of the penthouse and found its way through the door and into this room like a small piece of light. Valerie closed her eyes when she heard it. Her whole face changed, the tension releasing all at once, the careful control, softening into something unguarded and absolute. She's the reason, Valerie said, eyes still closed. Everything I did, everything I built, every decision I made from the moment I understood what Julian was, all of it was for her. She opened her eyes and looked at me. Help me protect her dad, she said. Help me finish this. My throat was tight again. My eyes were burning again. I seemed to spend a great deal of time in this building, trying not to cry, with mixed results. I pulled my chair closer to the bed and sat back down. Tell me about the $3 billion, I said, and then we're going to talk about what Julian does next before he does it. Valerie reached for the fresh mug of coffee Vance had quietly placed on the bedside table at some point, and she wrapped both hands around it, and she looked at me over the rim with those dark, fierce eyes that were so entirely hers and so entirely alive. "All right, Dad," she said. "Let's go to work." The video call connected at 9:17 the following morning. Vance had set up a secure communication system in the penthouse's main office, a room I hadn't seen yet, tucked behind a door that looked identical to every other door in the hallway, but opened into something that felt more like a small FBI field office than a home workspace. 3 monitors on a standing desk, an encrypted router the size of a hardcover book, its lights blinking in quiet, steady rhythms, soundproof panels on 2 walls, a whiteboard covered in what I recognized immediately as a financial flow diagram, boxes, arrows, account numbers in code, connecting lines in 3 different colors. I stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at it. "How long has this been here?" I asked Vance. 14 months, he said, pulling out the chair in front of the center monitor. "Sit down, Mr. Harrison. He's been waiting." I sat, the screen filled with the face of Elias Drummond. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, which had been at Valerie's wedding 6 years ago. Older and thinner, with new lines around his eyes and a grayness to his skin that spoke of too many late nights and too much worry carried for too long. But his eyes were the same, sharp, dark, precise. The eyes of a man who had been practicing law for 43 years and had never once confused loyalty with legality. "Edward," he said, and the relief in his voice was so immediate and unguarded that it hit me squarely in the chest. Thank God you're there." "Elias," I leaned forward. "You looked at me at the funeral. That look, what were you trying to tell me?" "That I couldn't talk," he said immediately. Julian had positioned himself directly beside me for the entire service. He does that, places himself where he can monitor conversations without appearing to. I've watched him do it at board meetings for 2 years. Elias pressed his fingers briefly against his forehead. "I needed you to know I was aware, that I was watching. That was all I could give you in that room." "Oh, why didn't you contact me afterward?" "My phone, my email, my office network, all monitored," Elias said flatly. Julian had his IT team install tracking software on every device in the EtherX legal department 8 months ago, under the guise of a cybersecurity upgrade. I discovered it when I had my personal laptop swept by an independent technician. A thin, grim smile. He thought isolating me from the board and cutting me out of executive communications meant I was neutralized. He was not entirely wrong about the isolation. He was entirely wrong about the neutralized part. "Tell me about the keylogger," I said. Elias straightened in his chair. 18 months ago, Valerie came to me with documentation of irregular financial transfers out of EtherX, he said. Small amounts initially under $10,000 each routed through what appeared to be routine vendor payments. But the pattern was there for anyone who knew how to look. He glanced briefly off-screen, then back. I took what she gave me to in contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Dana Reeves. I have known Dana for 11 years. She handled the Meridian Capital case I assisted with in 2017. She is meticulous, and she does not move until the evidence is airtight. And she agreed to pursue it, I said. She agreed that what Valerie had documented constituted probable cause for a financial crimes investigation. Elias said carefully, "We filed for a Title III wiretap order under the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act. Federal judge approved it 6 months ago, based on the financial evidence plus additional communications Valerie had preserved from Julian's personal email." He paused. The keylogger was installed on Julian's primary work terminal and his personal laptop by an FBI technical team during a routine building maintenance window. Julian was at a conference in Chicago. He never knew. I exhaled slowly. "How much have you collected?" 180 days of data, Elias said, and something in his voice shifted the controlled satisfaction of a man who has been patient for a very long time and can finally see the end of the patience paying off. Email chains directing specific wire transfers, encrypted messages between Julian and Sabrina Cole detailing the shell company structure, calendar entries referencing meetings that do not appear in any official EtherX record, and he reached off screen and returned with a folder, holding it up toward the camera. Voice recordings of 3 phone calls in which Julian explicitly discusses the insurance policy and the timeline for collecting on it. My hands pressed flat against the desk. He said it out loud, on a recorded call. He said, Elias read from the folder, his voice dropping into something deliberate and precise. And I quote, "The policy pays on accidental death. The accident has been confirmed. 30 days for the death certificate, 45 for the estate transfer. By February, we're liquid." End quote. He closed the folder and looked at me through the screen. That call was made the morning after Valerie's supposed funeral, Edward, the morning after. The cold that moved through me then had nothing to do with Seattle's winter. He was counting money at her funeral, I said. He had been counting it for months, Elias said. The funeral was simply the day the clock started. I stood up from the chair, without deciding, to the way your body sometimes acts before your mind has finished processing what it's just received. I walked 2 steps to the whiteboard and stood in front of the financial flow diagram, all those boxes and arrows and coded account numbers, and I looked at it the way I used to look at case boards in 31 years of federal work. I knew this shape. I had seen versions of it before, smaller, clumsier, built by less intelligent people. This one was elegant. This one had been constructed by someone who understood financial architecture the way Valerie understood physical architecture. Every line of defense anticipated, every exit route planned, every exit route except one. "Elias," I said, turning back to the screen, "how much time do we have before the signing ceremony? 40 days, Elias said. Julian has scheduled the estate transfer signing for day 45 from the date of death certificate issuance. He has invited 40 witnesses. He has already contacted the insurance company to confirm the payout timeline. A pause. He is moving very fast, Edward, faster than I anticipated. Because he's nervous, I said. Elias tilted his head slightly. What makes you say that? Because careful men who are confident slow down, I said. They take their time. They enjoy it. I looked back at the whiteboard. Men who rush are men who feel something closing in behind them, even if they can't see it yet. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Elias said quietly, Dana Reeves said almost exactly the same thing last week. And then Agent Reeves and I are going to get along fine, I said. Set up a meeting, all of us, as soon as possible. Already done, Elias said. And this time the smile that crossed his face was not thin or grim. It was the smile of a 71-year-old lawyer who had been waiting a very long time to stop playing defense. Day after tomorrow, he said. Seattle field office. Dana will be there in person. Agent Dana Reeves was not what I expected. I had worked alongside FBI agents for 31 years of federal financial investigations, and the ones who handled financial crimes tended to fall into 2 categories. The meticulous bureaucrats who moved through paperwork, like archaeologists brushing dust off ancient artifacts, and the aggressive tacticians who treated every case like a siege. Dana Reeves was neither. She was 45 medium height, with short dark hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of economical stillness that comes from years of listening more than talking. She wore a gray blazer over a white shirt, no jewelry except a plain watch, and she shook my hand across the conference table at the Seattle field office with a grip that told me immediately she was someone who meant every word she said. Mr. Harrison, she said, I've read your federal service record, all 31 years of it. Should I be flattered or concerned? I said. The corner of her mouth moved. Both probably. Sit down. We have a great deal to cover. Elias was already seated to my left, his folder open in front of him, a legal pad covered in his small, precise handwriting. Vance stood near the door he had driven me to the field office, and apparently had no intention of waiting in the car. Reeves glanced at him once and then looked back at me without comment, which told me she already knew exactly who he was. The financial scheme first, Reeves said, pulling a thick folder from the stack in front of her and opening it to a tabbed section. Because everything else the insurance claimed the estate transfers, Julian's entire endgame runs on the money. Understand the money, and you understand the man. She turned the folder to face me and slid it across the table. I looked down at the first page and felt my jaw tighten. I had spent 31 years staring at financial fraud diagrams. I had dismantled Ponzi schemes, traced offshore laundering operations, followed money through 17 layers of shell companies on 3 continents. I had seen sophisticated fraud. I had seen elegant fraud. I had seen fraud so carefully constructed that it had taken teams of investigators 3 years to unravel it. What I was looking at was the best I had ever seen. Walk me through it, I said. EtherX Technologies generates approximately $800 million in annual revenue. Reeves began, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone who had recited these numbers enough times that they had lost their shock value for her at least. Over the past 4 years, Julian Mercer and Sabrina Cole have systematically siphoned $3 billion from that revenue stream through a network of 200 shell companies. 200, as I repeated, registered across 7 jurisdictions, Reeves confirmed. Delaware, Cayman Islands, Singapore, Luxembourg, British Virgin Islands, UAE, and Montenegro. Each company receives individual transfers below $10,000, the threshold that triggers mandatory suspicious activity reports under the Bank Secrecy Act. Below that threshold, the transfers appear as routine vendor payments, consulting fees, licensing arrangements. Structuring, I said. The word came out with the particular distaste I had developed for it over 3 decades. Structuring the deliberate breaking of large transactions into small ones, specifically to avoid federal reporting requirements, was a federal crime in itself, independent of whatever the money was actually being used for. Classic structuring, yes, Reeves said, but with a layer of sophistication that took us 8 months to fully map. Each shell company has a legitimate-looking business profile website, registered agent apparent business activity. Julian used the same Big Four accounting firm for EtherX's external audits for 3 consecutive years, and that firm Ixcal, she paused, has since been informed that 2 of its senior partners accepted payments totaling $4 million to exclude the shell company accounts from the scope of their audit procedures. Derived auditors, I said flatly. We prefer incentivized non-disclosure in the indictment language, Reeves said, with a dryness that I found myself appreciating. The 2 partners have already been interviewed. One has retained counsel and stopped talking. The other is considering cooperation. I turned to the next page of the folder. A network diagram, boxes connected by lines, account numbers, transfer amounts, dates. I traced one pathway with my finger, EtherX operating account, to a Delaware LLC, to a Cayman holding company, to a Singapore investment vehicle, to a UAE private bank account, in a name I didn't recognize. It's this name, I said, tapping the UAE account. Whose is it? A Montenegrin national with no public connection to Julian Mercer or EtherX, Reeves said. He is a known financial intermediary, what we call a nominee account holder. He holds the account in his name for a fee and transfers funds upon instruction. We have been working with Montenegrin financial authorities for 4 months. They are cooperating. And the final destination of the funds, I asked. 2 primary accounts, Reeves said. She reached across and turned to a page near the back of the folder. One in Dubai, one in Montenegro. Combined current balance approximately $1.8 billion. The remaining $1.2 billion has been spent real estate acquisitions in Dubai and Montenegro, art purchases through European auction houses, and what appears to be a private aviation arrangement. I sat back in my chair and pressed my fingers hard against my mouth. $1.8 billion sitting in offshore accounts, $3 billion moved over 4 years, an infrastructure of 200 companies, bribed auditors, nominee, account holders, international financial authorities. And Julian Mercer had been running all of it while filing accurate internal reports to the Harrison board, while attending charity galas with Valerie on his arm, while putting thallium in her morning tea. He's been building an exit, I said. For at least 4 years, Reeves confirmed. The insurance payout and estate transfer were the final pieces. Once he had the $150 million in insurance money and control of the Harrison family assets, he intended to disappear. We believe within 60 days of the signing ceremony. To Dubai, I said. Dubai does not have an extradition treaty with the United States, Reeves said simply. The room felt very still. Elias had stopped writing on his legal pad. Vance near the door had his arms folded across his chest and his eyes on the middle distance with the expression of a man running calculations. I looked at Dana Reeves across the conference table. He was never going to stay, I said. The whole thing, the signing ceremony, the 40 witnesses, the performance of grief, it was all a departure gate. Yes, Reeves said. And Sabrina, I said. Does she know he plans to leave without her? Reeves opened her mouth. I closed it. Then she said carefully, "And that is an excellent question, Mr. Harrison, and the answer to it may be the most useful thing we have. She reached for a second folder and slid it across the table toward me. On the tab in neat black type was a single name, Sabrina Cole. The second folder was thinner than the first. But in my experience, the thinnest folders were often the most dangerous. Thin folders meant concentrated information, the kind of evidence that didn't need volume to be devastating. I opened it. The first page was a surveillance photograph. Grainy, taken from a distance with a long lens, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. A woman leaving a glass office building on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan. Tall, early 30s, dark red hair, pulled back a leather portfolio under one arm, and large sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She moved with the particular purposeful stride of someone who had somewhere important to be and intended to arrive there looking like she owned the building. Sabrina Cole, I said. 36 years old, Reeves said. Julian's executive secretary for 4 years. Prior to EtherX, she worked at 2 other financial services firms, both of which experienced irregular accounting discrepancies during her tenure, neither of which resulted in prosecution. Reeves tapped the photograph. She is not an innocent participant. She understood exactly what she was doing. But, I said, because there was clearly a but coming. But she is also a woman who has been promised things that Julian Mercer has absolutely no intention of delivering, Reeves said. She believes he is going to leave Valerie's estate, which he now believes is his, and start a new life with her, in Dubai. I turned to the next page. A printed transcript of an intercepted message exchange the keylogger's work. Julian's username on the left, a second username on the right, SC Private. I read down the page. Julian's messages were warm, specific, detailed, the kind of messages a man writes when he wants a woman to believe something completely. References to an apartment he had allegedly already purchased in Dubai Marina, a specific street, a specific building, a view of the water. You deserve everything I've been promising S. Just a few more weeks. Sabrina's responses were shorter, tighter. A woman trying to sound confident about something she wasn't entirely confident about. I need to know the timeline is real, Julian. I need more than words. And then Julian's final message in the exchange sent 11 days ago, the morning of Valerie's funeral. The clock started today. 45 days and we're free. Trust me. I set the transcript down. He sent that the morning of his wife's funeral, I said. While the service was still in progress, Reeves confirmed. Our technical team time-stamped it against the funeral home's official schedule. He sent it from his phone during the eulogies. I pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose and breathed through it. The image of Julian at that podium, steady hands, practiced grief, 11 minutes of perfectly calibrated performance overlaid itself onto that time stamp and produced a fury in my chest, so cold and so complete that it took genuine effort to keep my voice even. What does Sabrina not know? I asked. Reeves turned to the last page of the folder. A single document, a financial transfer record dated 6 weeks ago. Funds moved from one of the Montenegro accounts into a new account registered to a shell company I hadn't seen in the first folder. This account, Reeves said, pointing to a line near the bottom, was opened 5 weeks ago in the name of a Panamanian holding company with no connection to Sabrina Cole. It received a transfer of $40 million. She looked at me steadily. It is Julian's private exit fund. Sabrina's name appears nowhere in it. The Dubai apartment he described to her in those messages does not exist. We checked with Dubai Land Department records. He was going to take the money and vanish, I said, without her. Within 2 weeks of the signing ceremony, Reeves said, based on the flight arrangements we found in his calendar, private charter, Dubai 1 passenger. I looked at Elias. He was watching me with those sharp dark eyes over his reading glasses, his pen resting motionless on the legal pad. He gave a single small nod, the nod of a man confirming that, yes, this is as bad as it sounds, and yes, it matters exactly as much as you think it does. She doesn't know she's disposable, I said. Not yet, Reeves said, and that is where you come in, Mr. Harrison. I straightened in my chair. Tell me about the insurance policy first. All of it. Reeves pulled the first folder back and turned to a tab section near the middle. Valerie Harrison Mercer held an accidental death and dismemberment policy with Continental Federal Insurance, face value $150 million. The policy was purchased in Valerie's name 7 years ago before her marriage to Julian. At the time of purchase, the sole beneficiary was the Harrison Family Trust. And then it changed, I said. 18 months ago, the beneficiary designation was updated, Reeves said. The primary beneficiary was changed to Lily Harrison Mercer. Julian Mercer was listed as secondary beneficiary, meaning he collects only if Lily is deceased or legally incapacitated at the time of the claim. I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of rightness, the sensation of a piece moving into a position that had been waiting for it. "That Julian doesn't know," I said. "Julian has never seen the updated beneficiary form," Reeves confirmed. "The change was processed directly through the insurance company's policyholder services department. No copies were sent to the marital address. Valerie used a private mailbox service in Portland for all correspondence related to the update. So when he filed the claim, I began. He filed it as secondary beneficiary, citing Lily as unable to receive funds due to being a minor requiring guardian administration, with himself named as guardian," Reeves said. "Which would have worked if we hadn't already flagged the claim the moment it came in. The insurance company is cooperating fully with the investigation. The claim is frozen." "He walked into it," I said. "Completely," Reeves said. "The moment Julian filed that claim, he committed federal insurance fraud. On record, documented, time-stamped. The claim itself is now evidence." I sat with that for a moment, the image of Julian filing his carefully prepared insurance documents, confident, precise, certain of every detail, walking directly into a trap that had been waiting for him for 18 months. There's the immunity deal," I said. "Valerie, I need to understand exactly what she's protected from." Reeves folded her hands on the table. "Valerie signed a proffer agreement with this office 4 months ago. In exchange for full cooperation, including all evidence related to Julian's financial crimes, the identity of the Florida intermediary, and her testimony, she receives immunity from prosecution for the staged death, the body acquisition, the dental record falsification, and the fraudulent death certificate." "All of it," I said. "All of it," Reeves confirmed. "She came to us before she staged the accident. She laid out the entire plan, provided her reasons, and gave us first right of refusal on every piece of evidence she collected. We said yes because what she had on Julian was worth more to this investigation than prosecuting a woman who faked her own death to escape being murdered." A pause. "Frankly, Mr. Harrison, your daughter is the best cooperating witness I have worked with in 22 years. She documented everything, every dose of thallium she could evidence, every financial irregularity, every communication. She built this case while she was being poisoned." My throat tightened so sharply I had to look away from Reeves for a moment, fixing my eyes on the window and the gray Seattle sky beyond it. I pressed my knuckles hard against the corner of my mouth and held them there until the burning behind my eyes receded enough to be managed. "She built the case while he was poisoning her," I repeated very quietly, mostly to myself. "Yes," Reeves said, and her voice for the first time carried something warmer than professional precision. "She did." I turned back to the table. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Reeves looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Go back to Manhattan, Mr. Harrison. Go back and be exactly what Julian expects you to be, a grieving father, overwhelmed, cooperative, no threat to anyone. Let him believe he is 40 days from everything he has ever wanted." She paused, and when he reaches for it, she said, "We'll make sure Valerie is the one who hands it to him." The flight back to Manhattan felt nothing like the flight to Seattle. Going west, I had been a man falling towards something he couldn't name, grief pulling one way impossible, hope pulling the other, 5.5 hours of suspended uncertainty at 35,000 feet. Coming east, I knew exactly what I was flying toward. I knew the shape of it, the weight of it, the precise dimensions of the role I was about to play. I had spent 31 years putting on faces for federal investigations, neutrality during interrogations, patience during surveillance, the particular careful blankness of a man who knows everything and is performing the convincing theater of knowing nothing. I had never performed it for someone who had been poisoning my daughter. The taxi from JFK dropped me at my apartment building on West 72nd at 11:40 in the evening. The doorman, Marcus, 22 years, on the job. A man who had known Valerie since she was tall enough to reach the elevator buttons, held the door and said, "Welcome back, Mr. Harrison. We're all so sorry about Miss Valerie." I looked at his face, genuinely kind, genuinely grieving in the small, specific way that people grieve for someone who was always warm to them, and I felt the particular cruelty of what I was carrying, the truth that I couldn't give him. Not yet. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. She would have appreciated that. I went upstairs and stood in my apartment in the dark for a long moment, coat still on bag, still in my hand, looking at the city through the window. Then I turned on one lamp, sat down at the kitchen table, and wrote out everything Dana Reeves had told me to do, in a sequence I would not write down anywhere else. Be visible, be grieving, be cooperative, be no threat to anyone. 40 days. Julian called the next morning at 8:15. I was on my second cup of coffee standing at the window, watching a light snow dust, the tops of the buildings across the street, when the phone buzzed on the counter, his name on the screen. I set down the coffee mug, picked up the phone, and arranged my face into something tired and cooperative before I answered a useless gesture, since he couldn't see me. But habits built over 31 years don't ask permission before they activate. Julian, I said. Edward. His voice was warm, concerned, perfectly calibrated. I've been thinking about you. How are you holding up? Well, I'm getting through it, I said, day by day. That's all any of us can do. A pause timed with practiced empathy. Listen, I wanted to reach out because there are some estate matters I need to walk you through. Nothing urgent, I just want to make sure you're informed and comfortable with the process. Of course, I said, whatever you need. I was hoping we could have dinner, Julian said. Somewhere quiet, just the two of us. I think it would help to talk through things in person rather than over paperwork. That sounds fine, I said. When were you thinking? And Friday evening, 7 o'clock, I've taken a table at Oriole. Valerie always loved it there. He said her name with exactly the right weight, not too heavy, not too light. The weight of a man who has processed his grief to a manageable level and is now responsibly moving forward. I had heard that particular weight before, in the voice of a man I had investigated in 2009, who had defrauded his business partner of $11 million and attended the man's bankruptcy hearing with a face full of sympathetic regret. Oriole is perfect, I said. I'll see you Friday, Julian. I set the phone down on the counter and stood there with my hand pressed flat on the marble surface, breathing steadily through my nose until the cold fury in my chest settled back below the surface where it needed to stay. Oriole was on West 42nd Street, all warm lighting and white tablecloths, the kind of restaurant that existed to make difficult conversations feel civilized. Julian was already seated when I arrived, a deliberate choice I noted. Being seated first gave him control of the table orientation, the sightlines, the opening dynamic. I had done the same thing myself in federal meeting rooms more times than I could count. He stood when he saw me, came around the table and embraced me with both arms. A full embrace held for 3 seconds, the embrace of a man performing closeness with technical precision. Edward, he said, stepping back, hands on my shoulders. You look tired. I am tired, I said honestly. That part required no performance at all. We sat. He ordered wine without consulting me, a 1998 Bordeaux expensive, the kind of choice that announced wealth without announcing itself as announcing wealth. I noted it and said nothing. We talked about nothing important through the appetizers, the weather, a gallery show Valerie had been planning to attend, a memory Julian produced about a trip they had taken to the Amalfi Coast 2 summers ago. He told it well. He told it the way a man tells a story he has constructed, rather than remembered each detail, placed rather than recalled, the emotional beats landing with professional timing. I nodded. I smiled in the right places. I asked 1 or 2 gentle questions that let him talk more. I was wearing a recording device the size of a shirt button, taped below my left collarbone, courtesy of Agent Reeves's technical team. Every word Julian said was traveling in real time to an FBI monitoring station 4 blocks away. The main course arrived. Julian cut into his steak with the clean, decisive motions of a man who was comfortable with knives, and he looked up at me across the table with an expression of such deliberate gentleness that it made my stomach turn. Edward went on to talk about Valerie's estate, he said. I know this is painful, but I think she would have wanted us to handle it together, as family. Of course, I said. What did you have in mind? He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a folded document. He opened it, smoothed it flat with his palm, and turned it to face me across the table. It's a simple agreement, he said. A formal acknowledgement that you have no contestable claim against the Harrison family trust assets as currently administered. In exchange, he pointed to a figure near the bottom of the page. I'd like to offer you $5 million as a gesture of family consideration. I looked at the document, then I looked at Julian. He was watching me with those steady, confident, perfectly warm eyes. The eyes of a man who had already decided how this dinner ended. $5 million to sign away my daughter's inheritance. $5 million to clear the last obstacle between Julian Mercer and everything he had spent 4 years building toward. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. "Give me a few days to think it over, Julian," I said. "A decision like this deserves careful consideration." Something moved behind his eyes, the briefest flicker of frustration there, and gone in less than a second, buried under the warm, professional surface so fast that anyone who hadn't spent 31 years watching people suppress their real reactions would have missed it entirely. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Take all the time you need." He lifted his wine glass toward me. "To Valerie," he said. I raised mine. "And to Valerie," I said. And 4 blocks away in an FBI monitoring station on West 42nd Street, every word of it was being recorded. The message came on a Tuesday morning, 4 days after dinner at Oriole. I was at my kitchen table going through the document Julian had given me, not reading it exactly, more studying it. The way you study something you already know is a trap, looking for the specific mechanism that makes it spring. My reading glasses were on a fresh cup of coffee, was going cold beside my elbow, and the snow outside the window had returned, falling in the particular lazy way it falls when it has no intention of stopping. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, text message 3 words. "We need to talk." I stared at it for a moment. Then I typed back, "Who is this?" The response came in under 30 seconds. "Sabrina Cole, please, not by phone, in person, somewhere he won't look." I set the phone down on the table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and looked at the falling snow and thought about what Dana Reeves had said in the Seattle field office. "That is an excellent question, Mr. Harrison, and the answer to it may be the most useful thing we have." I picked up the phone and called Reeves. "It's Sabrina Cole just contacted me," I said the moment she answered. A brief pause. "How?" "Text. Unknown number. She wants to meet in person." Another pause longer. I could hear Reeves thinking the particular quality of silence that surrounds a person, making a fast, careful calculation. "Oh, meet her," Reeves said. "Wear the device. Public location your choice somewhere with ambient noise. Do not ask leading questions, let her talk. Whatever she gives you, however small, is admissible." "Understood," I said. "And Edward?" Reeves's voice dropped half a register. "Be careful with her. She is not innocent, but she is frightened. Frightened people are unpredictable." I chose a coffee shop on Amsterdam Avenue, a small independent place called Harlow's, the kind of establishment that existed in comfortable indifference to the larger world, with mismatched chairs and a permanently steamed-up front window and a noise level that made private conversation possible without requiring a private room. I arrived 15 minutes early, took a corner table facing the door, ordered a black coffee. I actually intended to drink this time, and waited. Sabrina Cole walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. She looked different from the surveillance photograph. In the photo, she had been composed, purposeful, moving through the world, with the authority of someone who knew her own value. The woman who pushed through Harlow's door and scanned the room with quick, nervous eyes was using the same face but wearing it differently. The confidence thinned out the edges of it showing. Her dark red hair was down instead of pulled back. She had on a plain gray coat, no leather portfolio, no large sunglasses. She looked like a woman who had spent several nights not sleeping nearly enough. She spotted me, and something in her expression shifted relief mixed with something that looked very much like shame, which I found more interesting than anything else she might have shown me. She crossed the room and sat down across from me, without speaking, pulling off her coat with quick, slightly unsteady movements. Her hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. She pressed them flat on the table in front of her, looked at them for a moment, and then looked up at me. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected, controlled but with something working hard underneath the control. "You reached out to me," I said simply. "I'm here, talk." She looked at me for another moment, assessing, I thought, deciding how much to trust a man she had every reason not to trust. Then she reached into her bag and produced a small USB drive, which she set on the table between us, without touching it further, as if she needed it to be neither fully in her possession nor fully surrendered. "I have been Julian's secretary for 4 years, she said. "I know what he has done. I helped him do some of it." Her jaw tightened. "I am not going to pretend otherwise." "All right," I said. "He told me we were building a future together," she said, and the words came out with a bitterness so concentrated it could have stripped paint. "He told me that when everything was finished, when the estate was transferred, when the insurance paid out, we would leave. Dubai. A new life." He showed me photographs of an apartment on the water. And you believed him, I said, carefully. No judgment in my voice, just the neutral acknowledgement of a fact. Her chin lifted slightly. I wanted to believe him. There is a difference. There is, I agreed. She pushed the USB drive half an inch closer to me. 3 weeks ago, I found a document on his personal laptop. He left it open. I don't know if it was careless or deliberate, but I saw it before I understood what I was looking at. She paused. It was a transfer record. $40 million moved into an account I had never seen before. A Panamanian holding company. My name was not on it. I have access to every financial account Julian has ever shown me. I am not on this one. What else was on the document? I asked. She pressed her lips together. A private charter booking, Dubai, 1 passenger, departure date 2 weeks after the signing ceremony. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and held it, not drinking, just holding the warmth against my palms. 1 passenger, I said. 1, she confirmed, and her voice cracked on the word, a small, sharp sound quickly controlled, but real. 4 years. I gave him 4 years. I moved money I knew I shouldn't move. I looked away from things I knew I shouldn't look away from. She exhaled hard through her nose. And he booked 1 seat. She reached into her bag again and produced a second item, a folded piece of paper, which she opened and pushed across the table toward me. I looked down at it. It was a printed email, Julian's address in the sender field. The recipient was an address I didn't recognize, a string of numbers and letters that suggested an encrypted service. The date was 9 days ago. The subject line read, post-signing cleanup. The body of the email was short, 4 lines. SC has served her purpose. She holds too much information to be a comfortable loose end. Timing, post-signing, pre-departure. Make it clean. Nothing traceable back to the transition. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the table with very deliberate care, the way you set down something fragile, not because the paper was fragile, but because what it contained required that kind of handling. He sent this 9 days ago, I said. Yes, Sabrina said. Her voice had gone very quiet. I found it in a folder on his laptop that he thought was encrypted. He used the same encryption software the firm uses for client files. I've known his system passwords for 2 years. I looked at her across the table. Her eyes were bright with something that was not quite tears, but was adjacent to them, the dry burning of a person who has been through the crying and come out the other side into something harder and colder. He was going to have you killed, I said, not a question. Yes, she said. The word came out stripped of everything except its own bare weight. It's Sabrina. I leaned forward slightly. The USB drive, what's on it, Besol. She looked at the drive between us. Transaction records, internal transfer orders in Julian's name, email chains between Julian and the Big Four partners. And, she stopped, swallowed. A folder of communications between Julian and the person he hired to follow Lily. 18 months of surveillance on a 3-year-old child. The cold fury that had been living in my chest since Seattle moved through me in a wave so complete that for 3 full seconds I couldn't trust my own voice. I pressed my back teeth together and breathed and waited for the wave to pass, enough to speak through. There is one more thing, Sabrina said. Her voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. He has a meeting this Saturday at a cabin in Vermont. He is taking Lily for a weekend visit. He told the nanny it was a bonding trip. She held my gaze without flinching. The person he hired is going to be at that cabin. My hand moved toward the USB drive. I picked it up and closed my fingers around it. Saturday, I said. That is 4 days from now. Yes, Sabrina said. I stood up from the table, put the drive in my coat pocket and looked down at her. Call Agent Dana Reeves, I said. FBI Seattle field office. Tell her Edward Harrison sent you. Tell her everything you just told me and show her everything on that drive. I held her gaze. If you cooperate fully, she will protect you. That is not a guarantee I can make, but I know Dana Reeves and I am telling you it is the truth. Sabrina looked up at me with those bright, dry eyes. Is Valerie really dead? She asked suddenly quietly, as if the question had been sitting in her chest for days and had finally found its way out. I looked at her for a long moment. Call Agent Reeves, I said, today. I left 2 $20 bills on the table for the untouched coffee, buttoned my coat against the January cold, and walked out of Harlow's into the snow. I truly appreciate you following this journey. Before I reveal what Edward discovered in Seattle, please comment yes or the number 1, so I know you're still riding along with him. And a quick note, the following events contain dramatized situations for educational and entertainment purposes. If this content is not for you, feel free to stop right here. I called Vance before I reached the end of the block. The snow was coming down harder now, settling on my shoulders and the brim of my hat, and I walked fast with the phone pressed against my ear, watching the street around me with a particular heightened awareness that activates when you understand that a clock has started counting down, and you cannot see the face of it clearly enough to know exactly how much time remains. Vance picked up on the first ring. "I know," he said before I could speak. I stopped walking. "What do you mean, you know?" "Reeves called me 40 minutes ago," he said. "Her team intercepted a communication between Julian and the contact in Vermont yesterday evening. The cabin booking is confirmed. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. He told the nanny he's taking Lily for a father-daughter weekend." A pause, and in that pause I heard something I had not heard in Vance's voice before. A tightness, a controlled urgency that told me this man who had held himself with absolute professional composure through everything I had witnessed was feeling the specific fear that comes when a child in your protection is the target. "Lily has not been out of my sight since I got off the phone with Reeves. She is right here. She's fine." I exhaled so hard the breath fogged in the cold air in front of my face. "She stays in Seattle," I said. "She was never going to Vermont," Vance said with a quiet certainty that left no room for any other possibility. "Julian can book every cabin in the state. He is not getting near her." "What's the plan?" "Reeves is coordinating," he said. "She wants Julian to arrive at the cabin on Saturday and find it empty. No Lily, no nanny, no explanation. Let him panic. Let him make calls he shouldn't make from a location that's already under FBI surveillance." Another pause. "She said to tell you, stay in Manhattan. Be visible. If Julian calls you Saturday, answer it. Sound worried. Sound like a grandfather who just heard his granddaughter was taken on a surprise trip and can't reach anyone." "He'll call," I said. "When he finds the cabin empty, his first move will be to establish his own alibi by reaching out to people who can confirm he had no idea anything was wrong." "Exactly what Reeves said," Vance confirmed. "Vance." I stopped under a building awning out of the snow and dropped my voice. "The person Julian hired, the one who was supposed to be at the cabin. Do we know who it is?" "Name is Carl Deering," Vance said. "Freelance. Former military dishonorable discharge, 2 priors for assault. He operates out of upstate New York. A beat. Reeves has had eyes on him since yesterday. He drove to Vermont this morning. He's at the cabin right now waiting." My stomach turned. "He's already there." "Which means he's already in FBI surveillance range," Vance said. "Reeves is letting him sit. The moment Julian fails to appear with Lily, Deering either leaves, in which case they follow him, or he calls Julian, in which case that call gets recorded and adds another layer to the conspiracy charge." I leaned against the cold marble of the building behind me and processed the geometry of it. Julian driving to Vermont with a child he intended to harm, a hired man waiting at a cabin, FBI surveillance on both ends, and Lily, 3 years old, red pajamas, Mr. Buttons under her arm, safe in a Seattle penthouse 70 floors above the Sound. "Tell her I said hello," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. A brief pause on the line, then slightly away from the phone, Vance said, "Lily, your grandpa says hello." And from a distance small and clear and utterly completely unaware of any of what surrounded her existence came Lily's voice. "Tell Grandpa Mr. Buttons says hi back, and also we had pancakes facade." Something cracked open in the middle of my chest and let in a rush of feeling so acute it was almost physical pain. I pressed my fist hard against my sternum and breathed through it. "Pancakes," I managed. "Blueberry." Vance confirmed, and I heard in his voice the same thing I was feeling, not quite amusement, not quite grief, but the particular fierce tenderness of 2 men standing on opposite sides of a continent, united entirely by their determination that a small girl who liked blueberry pancakes and had opinions about her stuffed bear was going to grow up in a world where no one could touch her. Saturday came in cold and clear, the snow from the previous week packed hard on the sidewalks, the sky a bright brittle blue. I sat in my apartment and waited. Julian called at 9:47 in the morning. I let it ring twice before I answered the way a man answers when he has been sitting quietly and is mildly surprised by the interruption. "Julian," I said. "Edward." His voice was different. The warmth was still there, but it was stretched thin over something else, something tight and urgent that he was working very hard to keep out of his tone. Have you heard from Valerie's nanny, the woman who's been caring for Lily? I let a beat of genuine confusion color my voice. Margaret, no. Not recently. Why, I drove up to the cabin this morning to spend the weekend with Lily, and a pause. She's not here. The cabin is empty. Margaret isn't answering her phone. What? I put alarm into my voice, not difficult, because the alarm was real, just redirected. What do you mean she's not there? Where is she? I don't know. His voice tightened further. I've been calling for 2 hours. I'm going to contact the police if I don't hear something in the next... Julian. I cut across him firm but controlled. Don't panic. Children's routines get disrupted. Margaret probably took her somewhere for the weekend and forgot to confirm with you. Call the agency that placed her. They'll have an emergency contact. A pause. I could hear him breathing slightly faster than normal, the breathing of a man whose careful plan had just encountered an obstacle he had not anticipated and was rapidly recalculating. You're right, he said, pulling the warmth back into his voice with visible effort. You're probably right. I'll call the agency. Call me when you find her, I said. I want to know she's safe. Of course, Julian said. Of course. He hung up. I set the phone on the kitchen table and sat back in my chair and looked at the bright blue winter sky through the window. 4 blocks away or 500 miles away, depending on which piece of this I was measuring, the machinery that Valerie had set in motion 18 months ago was turning exactly as she had designed it to turn. Every gear meshing with every other gear, every contingency accounted for. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. A text from a number I now recognized as one of Reeves's team. Deering detained. Julian's call to Deering intercepted and recorded. Julian leaving Vermont now. All good. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table, folded my hands in front of me, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I let myself feel something that was not grief or fury, or the cold, disciplined focus of a man working a case. I felt quietly and completely like a father, not a federal investigator, not a man tracking money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Not a grieving widower sitting in the front pew of a church full of white lilies. A father whose daughter had outthought a monster, whose granddaughter was eating blueberry pancakes 70 floors above Puget Sound, whose family, broken and scattered and reconstructed in ways he never could have imagined, was against every reasonable probability going to be all right. My eyes burned. I let them. Outside, the bright blue winter sky held steady over Manhattan, and somewhere in Vermont, an empty cabin sat in the cold, and a very careful man drove back toward a city where everything he believed was already unraveling at the seams. 27 days until the signing ceremony. We were ready. 3 days after the Vermont incident, Reeves called a final planning meeting. Not in the Seattle field office this time. Reeves had arranged a secure conference room in a law firm on the 42nd floor of a midtown Manhattan building, neutral ground, away from any location Julian might have, under surveillance with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city, and a long table that could seat 12, but held only 5 of us. Elias arrived first as he always did, with his folder and his legal pad, and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Vance came in 2 minutes later, having flown in from Seattle that morning. He had left Lily in the care of 2 FBI protective detail agents at the penthouse. A fact that I knew cost him something real, though he would not have said so. Reeves was already at the head of the table. When I arrived, her laptop opened a series of photographs and documents spread in a precise grid across the table's surface. And at the far end of the table in a wheelchair, because Elias had insisted, and she had argued about it for 20 minutes before conceding, was Valerie. I stopped in the doorway when I saw her. She had been in Seattle the last time I saw her, pale-thinned, horizontal. Now she was upright, dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater, her thinning hair pulled back with the same decisive practicality she had always applied to things she couldn't change. She looked fragile in the way that a structure looks fragile when it has been tested by real force and held, not weakened exactly, but showing its load. Her eyes, when they found mine across the room, were completely alive. You flew, I said. Vance drove me to the airport, she said. I argued about the wheelchair for the entire ride. I know, Vance said from behind me with the flat patience of a man who has had this conversation before. You lost. Valerie pointed at him. Noted for the record. I crossed the room and pulled a chair close to hers and sat down. She reached over and gripped my hand once hard, a brief fierce pressure, and then released it and turned to face the table, like a general turning to face a map. All right, Reeves said, pulling the room's attention without raising her voice. "We have 24 days. Let's use them well." She walked us through it in order, the way she walked through everything methodical, complete, nothing left to inference. Julian had returned from Vermont in a controlled panic that he was managing with characteristic precision. He had filed no missing person report. Doing so would have drawn attention to the cabin and to Deering, whose detention he almost certainly knew about by now through back channels. Instead, he had contacted the nanny agency, been told that Margaret had taken emergency family leave, and had quietly arranged for Lily to be brought back to Manhattan under the supervision of a new caregiver he had personally selected. He selected her himself, Reeves said, which means he vetted her himself, which means he trusts her in ways he does not trust people he hasn't personally vetted. We ran her. Clean record, genuine credentials. She is not part of his network. She is simply someone he chose carefully because he can no longer afford careless choices. "He's tightening," I said. "He's scared," Valerie said quietly from beside me. "When Julian gets scared, he contracts. He pulls everything close and controls it harder. It's what he did every time a board meeting went sideways. He would spend the next week micromanaging every person around him." She paused. "It makes him predictable." "Which is exactly what we need him to be for the next 24 days, Reeves confirmed. She turned to the documents on the table and began moving through them one by one. Elias walked us through the legal architecture first. The Harrison family trust documents had been reviewed by 3 independent estate attorneys, all of whom confirmed the same conclusion: Julian held no direct inheritance rights. Lily, as Valerie's biological daughter, was the primary heir. Valerie, very much alive, superseded the entire question. The death certificate issued after the staged accident would be formally voided by court order the moment Valerie made her existence known, a process Elias had already filed the preliminary paperwork for under seal. The insurance claim, Elias continued turning a page in his folder, has been frozen by Continental Federal Insurance in cooperation with the FBI since the day Julian filed it. The claim itself constitutes federal insurance fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1033. Combined with the wire fraud charges from the financial transfers, the conspiracy to commit murder charges from the Deering operation, and the thallium poisoning. He looked over his reading glasses at the table. Julian Mercer is looking at federal charges that carry a combined maximum sentence of over 100 years. The number settled over the room. Vance, who had been leaning back in his chair with his arms folded across his chest and his eyes moving steadily between each speaker, said, "What about Sabrina?" Yet Sabrina Cole signed a full cooperation agreement with this office 6 days ago, Reeves said. She has provided testimony, the USB drive contents, and access to a personal email archive that adds 17 additional incidents of documented financial fraud to the existing charges. In exchange, she receives a 5-year suspended sentence, full asset forfeiture of any funds received from Julian, and supervised release. A pause. She will also testify at trial. She will make an effective witness, Elias said, with the measured assessment of a man who had been reading juries for 4 decades. She is articulate, she is clearly remorseful, and she was directly involved in the operation she is describing. Juries respond to that combination. Reeves moved to the final section of the table, a floor plan, the black obsidian tower. Julian had renamed the Harrison Tech building 18 months ago, shortly after maneuvering himself into effective operational control. 70th floor, the penthouse conference suite, the room where the signing ceremony was scheduled. Julian has confirmed 40 witnesses, Reeves said. 12 are lawyers or legal representatives. 8 are financial industry contacts. The remaining 20 are media. He has invited journalists. Edward. He wants this documented. He wants the inheritance transfer on record on camera in front of witnesses who can testify that it was conducted properly. He wants legitimacy, I said. He wants a performance, Valerie said, and her voice carried something sharp and knowing. He has always wanted an audience. The bigger the better. He thinks witnesses protect him, that 40 people watching makes it real and uncontestable. She looked at Reeves. He is going to get his audience. Reeves turned to Valerie. Talk us through your part. Valerie straightened in the wheelchair. She reached into the bag beside her and produced a single sheet of paper, which she set on the table in front of her. A typed outline, precise and spare, each line a stage direction in a production she had been writing for 18 months. I arrive at the building before Julian, she said. Vance brings me up through the service entrance. The floor plan shows a service elevator that reaches 70 without accessing the main lobby. I wait in the auxiliary conference room adjacent to the main suite until the ceremony is underway. She moved her finger down the page. The moment Julian places the documents in front of Edward for signature, I walk through the connecting door. In front of 40 witnesses, Elias said. In front of 40 witnesses, Valerie confirmed, including 8 journalists. And the evidence presentation, Reeves said. The main display screen in the conference suite will be connected to a secure feed controlled by Elias's team. Valerie continued. The moment I enter the room, the feed activates. Keylogger footage, financial transfer records, the Deering communication, the thallium purchase documentation. She paused. Everything in sequence on a screen large enough for every person in that room to see clearly. The room was very quiet for a moment. Not the empty quiet of nothing happening, but the dense charged quiet of people absorbing the weight of something fully realized. Then I looked at Valerie beside me. She was watching me with those dark, alive eyes, and in them I could see everything. The 18 months of planning, the pain of the thallium, the months away from Lily. The careful construction of every piece of what was about to happen, all of it held in a gaze that was steadier than anything I had felt in weeks. Dad, she said quietly, when you see me walk through that door, I know, I said. Don't react, she said. No matter what you feel, not until Julian sees me. The reaction has to be his first. The cameras have to catch his face before anything else. I looked at my daughter in her wheelchair, thinned and marked by what had been done to her, alive and implacable, and 2 weeks away from ending the thing she had set in motion at the cost of everything. And I felt the particular quality of pride that has grief woven through it that cannot exist without the grief, because the grief is what gives it its true weight. I won't react, I said. She held my gaze for one more second. Then she nodded once and turned back to the table. 24 days, she said. Let's finish this. The morning of day 45 arrived the way certain mornings do, quietly without drama, as if the day had no idea what it was carrying. I was awake before 5. I had slept perhaps 3 hours, which was 2 more than I expected. I made coffee, stood at the window in my robe, and watched Manhattan come slowly to life. In the gray January pre-dawn, the first delivery trucks, the early joggers, the lights coming on in apartments across the street, as the city performed its daily resurrection with magnificent indifference to the fact that today was not an ordinary day. I showered. I shaved with more care than usual, the way you shave when the face in the mirror is going to be seen by people who are paying attention. I put on the dark charcoal suit I had worn to every significant federal proceeding of my career, not superstition, exactly more, the comfort of a familiar instrument. White shirt, navy tie, my father's cufflinks gold, plain the kind that don't announce themselves. My phone showed 2 messages when I picked it up from the nightstand. The first was from Reeves, sent at 4:47 a.m. All positions confirmed. 12 agents on site. Feed tested and operational. We're ready. The second was from Valerie, sent at 4:59 a.m. 4 words. Today we fly, Dad. I read it twice, pressed my thumb against the screen for a moment, then I put the phone in my breast pocket, picked up my coat, and left the apartment. The black obsidian tower stood on the corner of 6th Avenue and 53rd Street, 70 floors of dark glass, catching the pale winter light and throwing it back in cold, perfect angles. I had walked past this building hundreds of times over the years when it was still Harrison Tech, when it still had my family's name on it, when the lobby had a portrait of my father on the eastern wall, and the receptionist knew my name, and Valerie used to bring her artwork to hang in the executive corridors. Julian had taken the portrait down 8 months ago. He had replaced it with a piece of abstract sculpture that cost $400,000 and meant nothing. I pushed through the lobby doors at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The lobby had been transformed for the occasion in the way that Julian transformed everything he touched, expensively, impressively, with the precise aesthetic of a man who understood that appearance was its own argument. White floral arrangements on every surface. A registration desk near the elevator bank, where a young woman in a black blazer checked names against a list and handed out embossed programs. I gave her my name. She found it immediately first on the list underlined. Mr. Harrison, she said with a smile that was warm and professional and entirely unaware of anything. Mr. Mercer is expecting you. 70th floor. The elevators are ready. Thank you, I said. The elevator ride to the 70th floor took 45 seconds. I counted them. The conference suite occupied the entire eastern face of the 70th floor, a vast high-ceilinged room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over Midtown Manhattan, the city spread below in its dense, intricate entirety. A long table ran the center of the room, already surrounded by people, the lawyers and financial contacts and journalists Julian had assembled, with such careful deliberation, their voices creating a low, civilized murmur that bounced off the glass walls. At the far end of the table, standing in conversation with two men in expensive suits, was Julian. He saw me the moment I stepped through the door. His face opened into something warm and welcoming, and he crossed the room toward me with his hand already extended, the practiced ease of a man entirely in his element, hosting the most important performance of his life. "Edward?" He gripped my hand in both of his. "Thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy." "It's where I need to be," I said. He guided me to the seat at his immediate right, the seat of honor, the seat that said, "This man is family. This man matters. This man has been consulted and respected." And I sat down and placed my hands flat on the table in front of me and looked at the room. 40 people, 8 journalists, 2 of whom I recognized from major financial publications, their notebooks already open. 12 lawyers arranged in a careful cluster at the far end, their briefcases aligned with the precision of people who billed by the hour and intended every minute to count. The display screen on the eastern wall was dark, a large, high-resolution panel, easily visible from every seat in the room. Elias sat 3 chairs to my left. He had positioned himself there deliberately close enough to communicate far enough to appear incidental. He caught my eye for the briefest moment, then looked back at the document in front of him. His expression was the expression of a 71-year-old lawyer reviewing routine paperwork. His hands, I noticed, were completely steady. Mine were not. I pressed them harder against the table. Julian moved to the head of the room, and the murmur settled into attentive quiet. "Thank you all for being here," Julian said, his voice carrying easily in the high-ceilinged room, warm and measured and precisely calibrated. "I know Valerie would have been grateful for the care and respect this gathering represents." He paused, exactly the right pause, exactly the right weight. "What we're doing today is honoring her legacy by ensuring that everything she built continues with stability and clarity. That's what she would have wanted." Several people nodded. One of the journalists wrote something in her notebook. I looked at the connecting door on the room's south wall, a door that appeared to every person in this room to be a storage access or a secondary exit. A door behind which right now Vance was standing in the auxiliary conference room with Valerie beside him. Julian moved to his chair and sat down. His assistant placed a stack of documents in front of him, clean, and ordered each tabbed with colored markers. He lifted the top set and slid them smoothly down the table toward me. "These are straightforward," Julian said, with the confident ease of a man who had rehearsed this sentence until it required no rehearsal. "A formal acknowledgement of the estate transfer as structured under the trust administration. Page 4 requires your signature, Edward. Elias has reviewed everything." He looked at me with those steady, warm, confident eyes. I picked up the pen his assistant had placed beside the documents. I turned to page 4. I looked at the signature line, a clean blank line, weighting the most expensive blank line I had ever seen in 31 years of financial work. I held the pen above it. The room was very quiet, 40 people watching one pen above one line. I held it there for 5 seconds. 6, 7. And then from the south wall of the room came the sound of a door handle turning. Every head in the room turned toward the sound, the instinctive simultaneous rotation of 40 people responding to the unexpected. Julian turned last because Julian was watching me, and something in my face in that moment, something I could not entirely control, some involuntary shift of expression made him turn slowly with the particular caution of a man who has just felt the ground move under him and is not yet sure how badly. The connecting door opened, and Valerie Harrison walked through it. The room stopped breathing. That is the only way I can describe it. 40 people, mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-sentence, and then nothing. Complete total suspension. The kind of stillness that only happens when something occurs that the human mind requires a full second to process because it has no existing category for what it is seeing. Valerie stood in the doorway in a white suit. She had chosen white deliberately. I understood that immediately, the way you understand a statement that doesn't need explanation. White was the color of the casket Julian had selected for her funeral. White was the color of surrender she had always said. She was wearing it now as the opposite of surrender. She was wearing it as a declaration. Her hair was short, grown back unevenly from the thallium's damage, and she had done nothing to disguise that, no wig, no careful styling to hide what had been done to her. She stood straight chin level, dark eyes moving across the room with a precision that took in everything and dismissed nothing. In her left hand, she carried a single folder, thin and dark, held against her side, with the calm authority of someone who knows exactly what they are holding and exactly what it is worth. She looked, I thought, like someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side, not unburned but unbroken, marked by it, carrying the marks openly using them. For 3 full seconds nobody moved. Then the room detonated. Voices erupting simultaneously, shock, confusion. A journalist half rising from her chair, with her hand pressed over her mouth. One of the lawyers knocking his water glass sideways, so it rolled off the table and shattered on the floor. 2 people speaking at once in the high, urgent registers of genuine disbelief. The sound hit the glass walls and bounced back doubled, and through all of it. Valerie stood in the doorway and did not move, and did not look away from Julian. Julian, I had been watching him. I had promised Valerie I would not react until Julian reacted first, and I had kept that promise by fixing my eyes on his face the moment the door handle turned. I had 31 years of reading people in their worst and most unguarded moments, and what I saw move across Julian Mercer's face in those first 3 seconds was the most complete unraveling I had ever witnessed. It started in his eyes. The warmth, that practice manufactured warmth that he wore like a second skin, simply fell away as if the muscles holding it in place had lost their signal. What was underneath was not grief, not shock, not the confusion of a man seeing something impossible. What was underneath was recognition. He knew immediately. He knew before his mind had time to construct a denial, before his body had time to perform a reaction. He knew, and knowing destroyed him, and the destruction was visible on his face for 4 full seconds before he managed to pull anything back over it. His hands flat on the table in front of him, pressed down hard, hard enough that his knuckles went white, hard enough that the tendons in his forearms stood out against his skin, his jaw locked. His breathing changed. I could see it from 3 seats away, the shallow, rapid shift of a man whose body has just understood something that his mind is still trying to refuse. "Hello, Julian," Valerie said. Her voice was steady and clear, and carried to every corner of that room, as if the room had been built for it. "And miss me?" Julian's mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time in 6 years of watching this man perform composure under pressure, I watched him find no words at all. The display screen on the eastern wall came alive. Elias had the remote in his hand. I saw him press it from the corner of my eye, a small, decisive motion, and the screen filled with the first image, a financial transfer record, dates, stamped account numbers, clearly visible Julian's digital signature at the bottom of the authorization. A voice came through the room's speakers. Simultaneously, Julian's voice recorded, clean and unmistakable. "The policy pays on accidental death. The accident has been confirmed. 30 days for the death certificate, 45 for the estate transfer. By February, we're liquid." The journalist's notebooks came out instantly, every pen moving. "That recording," Elias said, standing addressing the room with the measured authority of a man who had spent 43 years making himself heard in rooms full of powerful people, "was made on the morning of Valerie Harrison's funeral. It was captured under a federal Title III wiretap order issued by the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington." He turned a page in his folder. "The insurance claim filed by Julian Mercer against Continental Federal Insurance for $150 million constitutes federal insurance fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1033 and is hereby formally contested by the insured party, who is, as you can see, very much alive." Valerie had crossed the room, while Elias spoke, moving to the table, setting her folder down, at the empty chair between me and the head of the table, Julian's right hand, the position of someone who belonged there. She pulled the chair out and sat down with the deliberate ease of a woman reclaiming something that was always hers. She opened her folder, slid a document across the table toward Julian. "The Harrison Family Trust," she said, "has never been transferred. The death certificate issued in my name is void. The court order voiding it was filed this morning at 7 a.m. by Elias Drummond on my behalf." She looked at Julian across the table with those dark, alive, implacable eyes. "You have no claim to this estate, Julian. You have no claim to the insurance policy. You have no claim to this company. And you have no claim to my daughter." Julian pushed back from the table and stood up. He started, and his voice came out wrong, too high, too fast. The voice of a man whose instrument had failed him at the moment he needed it most. "This is fabricated, all of it. You staged your own death. You committed fraud. Mr. Mercer?" The voice came from the back of the room. Agent Dana Reeves walked forward from the doorway where she had been standing unnoticed since 2 minutes into the ceremony. Behind her, 4 FBI agents in dark jackets moved into position, 2 at the room's exits, 2 flanking the table. Reeves reached the head of the table and stopped directly across from Julian. She held up her credentials with one hand and with the other produced a folded document. "Julian Mercer," she said with the flat, precise clarity of someone reading from a text they know by heart, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and criminal structuring under the Bank Secrecy Act." She set the arrest warrant on the table in front of him. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Julian looked at the warrant, looked at Valerie, looked at me. I met his eyes across that table. The table in a building that had my family's name in its foundation, that he had renamed and redecorated and tried to strip of everything my father had built. And I held his gaze and did not look away and did not speak, because there was nothing left to say that the room had not already said more clearly than any words I could have chosen. The 2 agents flanking the table moved forward. Julian did not resist. The fight had gone out of him in the moment Valerie walked through that door. I had watched it happen, watched the thing that had animated and sustained him for 4 years simply drain out through the soles of his expensive shoes and disappear into the floor. What the agents put handcuffs on was a man who had already lost and who knew it and who had known it from the second he saw a dead woman standing in a white suit in a doorway that he had been certain was impossible. The room was chaos around us. Journalists on their phones, lawyers clustered in urgent conversation. Someone was crying I didn't know who and didn't turn to look. Valerie sat beside me at the table, straight-backed hands folded in front of her, watching Julian be led toward the elevator with the steady eyes of a woman who had paid an extraordinary price for this moment and intended to look at it directly. I reached over and put my hand over hers. She turned her palm up and gripped my fingers, that grip weaker than it used to be, but getting stronger, the grip of a woman coming back to herself, and she held on. Neither of us needed to say anything. For once in 45 days, that was enough. The days after day 45 moved differently. Before every hour carried the weight of a countdown. After time expanded back into something closer to breathable, not normal, not yet, but survivable in a way the previous 45 days had not always been. Julian was remanded to federal custody the same afternoon, bail denied, in 4 minutes flat. The indictment filed the following morning ran 47 pages and named 31 separate federal charges: wire fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, criminal structuring. I read every page at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold beside my elbow, and I felt something I had not felt in 6 years. Of Sunday dinners and handshakes and carefully managed suspicion, I felt the relief of a man who had known something was wrong and had finally irrevocably been proven right. Valerie's legal resurrection took 11 days. 11 days to undo what Julian had constructed in 72 hours. Identity documents, reinstated bank accounts, unfrozen. The Harrison family trust confirmed intact and untouched. Elias handled every piece of it with the methodical patience of a man who had been waiting for this specific task for 18 months. She restructured the trust before she disappeared. He told me one morning, setting down his coffee cup with quiet satisfaction. Julian never had access. He thought he did. Every document he filed after her staged death was built on a legal premise that did not exist. Like she built the cage before she staged the escape, I said. Precisely, Elias said. And the smile on his face was the smile of a man who had helped her do it and would carry that with pride for the rest of his life. Sabrina appeared in federal court on day 63, 5 years suspended, full asset forfeiture, supervised release. Reeves called me afterward. As she testified for 4 hours, Reeves said. Didn't waver once. She asked me to tell you something. What I said? She said, tell Mr. Harrison I'm sorry, not for getting caught, for doing it in the first place. I sat with that for a long moment. Tell her I heard her, I said. On day 71, Valerie painted for the first time since before the thallium. I was in the kitchen when I heard the particular silence that meant she had started a silence with texture, the silence of a person entirely inside something. I did not disturb her. 3 hours later, she came out carrying a canvas still wet and set it on the table in front of me. A cicada, mid-flight. Wings spread, body, catching light, every detail, precise and particular. Not clinging, not emerging, but flying, moving through open air with the complete commitment of something that had shed every constraint it was born into. My eyes burned the moment I saw it. "Val," I managed. "It's yours," she said. "It was always going to be yours." I pressed my hand flat over my mouth and looked at it, this painting made by her hands with her recovering grip and her completely intact vision, and I felt grief and gratitude and love braided together into something with no clean name. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," I said, and my voice broke on the last word without apology. Valerie sat down across from me. She covered my hand with hers, and her grip was stronger than it had been in Seattle, stronger every week, coming back to itself, the way she was coming back to herself. "Elias called this morning," she said quietly. "What did he say?" I asked. Her eyes went bright, not with tears, but with something better. "The court approved the name change," she said. "It's official, Dad." I looked at her across the kitchen table in the pale Seattle morning light with the cicada painting between us. "Harrison and daughter," I said. She smiled full complete, reaching all the way into those dark eyes. "In Harrison and daughter," she said. 6 months after day 45, the building got its name back. The lettering went up on a Thursday morning in late July. Harrison and Daughter Incorporated in a typeface Valerie had designed herself. The two H's interlocked like a cicada's wings mid-flight. I stood on the sidewalk across 6th Avenue with a coffee going warm in my hand and watched the crew mount each letter against the dark glass facade one by one, and felt a fullness I had no precise word for. A circle closing, a thing restored that had been taken so quietly over so many years that I hadn't fully understood it was gone until I watched it come back. Vance stood beside me. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like something that should have happened a long time ago," I said. "And exactly on time." He nodded. Then after a moment, "She's asked me to stay, Director of Security." "I know," I said. "She told me." I said yes, he said. "Did you consider saying anything else?" "No," he said without hesitation. "Not for a single second." The official reopening was held that Friday evening. 300 people filled the lobby, colleagues, clients, journalists, a handful who had been in the conference suite on day 45 and had not stopped talking about it since. The portrait of my father hung again on the eastern wall, retrieved from the storage room where Julian had consigned it. He looked exactly as he always had, steady, particular, a man who had built something real and expected it to last. It was lasting. Valerie moved through the room in a red dress, sparkling water in hand, laughing and talking, with the ease of someone entirely comfortable in their own existence, which she had always been, which no amount of thallium or manipulation had managed to strip from her. I watched her from across the lobby, the way I had watched her entire life, with the particular attentiveness of a parent who cannot quite believe the person they are looking at is real and present and theirs. I was still watching her when the small weight hit my right leg. 2 arms wrapped around it with total unconditional commitment. I looked down. Lily looked up at me from beneath her spectacular dark curls, wearing a red dress that matched her mother's, definitely not a coincidence with Mr. Buttons tucked under one arm, his single upright ear catching the warm lobby light. "Grandpa," she said with the gravity of a diplomat, "Mr. Buttons says this is a very good party." I crouched down to her level and looked at her small, serious face. Those gray eyes, Valerie's chin, the expression of a child who has decided you are worth her full attention. "Tell Mr. Buttons I agree completely," I said. She turned and whispered into his ear with great ceremony. Then she looked back at me. "He says thank you, and also can we have cake?" I laughed a real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind that starts in your chest and takes over everything. I picked her up, and she wrapped her arms around my neck and pressed her warm cheek against my jaw, and I held my granddaughter in the lobby of the building that had my family's name on it again. Across the room, Valerie was watching us. She raised her glass of sparkling water toward me, a small, quiet toast meant only for me. I nodded back. Lily patted my cheek with one small hand. "Grandpa, cake." "Cake," I agreed, and I carried her across the lobby of Harrison and Daughter, toward the rest of whatever came next, with my daughter's eyes warm on my back, and my granddaughter's laugh in my ear, and the city alive and indifferent and magnificent beyond the glass. Standing atop the tower that bears our family name, a single truth remains. The truth is never buried. It only waits for the right moment to rise. Dad. Family revenge was never my life's goal, but protecting my blood is my ultimate instinct. I spent my career tracking numbers, yet I nearly lost my greatest treasure because of my own oversight. This dad family revenge is the most expensive lesson I have ever learned, paid for in tears. Never place blind faith in the perfect facade of others. These family stories' revenge teach us that greed can turn kin into monsters. My sincere advice, don't be like me. Don't wait for tragedy to strike before you start paying attention. Wake up before the poison seeps into your own life. I believe God is always watching. He allows evil to thrive for a season only to test the mettle of the righteous. This chapter of family stories, revenge ends here, but the new lives of Valerie and Lily have just begun. My stance is clear: those who sow the wind will reap the whirlwind. Never show mercy to those who seek to destroy your home. Dad family revenge finally brought justice. And these family stories, revenge will serve as a warning to anyone who dares to disrespect the bonds of blood.